Good morning. The Country Women's Association wants a Senate inquiry into regional banking to consider the impact branch closures have on both customers and the wider community. Branches have closed recently in Sussex Inlet, Ulladulla, Fig Tree, Corrimal and Thirroul. The CWA made a submission to the previous federal government's Regional Banking Task Force. CEO Danica Lees says branch closures have a knock-on effect for the local economy.
So when bank branches decide to leave certain towns and villages, not only are they taking jobs out of that area, but they are really impacting the remaining businesses that are in that area.
Shoalhaven councillor and Sussex Inlet resident Patricia White says while Australia Post has stepped in to offer some banking services there, it's not enough to cater for elderly residents unable to travel to Nowra or Ulladulla.
Some of those people have a restricted licence, up to 60% of them, so they can't travel more than 15 k's, which is from Sussex to the highway. There's no public transport. They've got a journey of either 45 k's to Ulladulla or 45 k's to Nowra.
First of all, let's go to bank branches. As we've seen, banks are closing their branches, particularly in small towns and villages right around Australia. Hundreds of them across the country have been cut, especially by the Big Four, who are going to be part of a new parliamentary inquiry into these closures, going to be held by the Senate. The Senate inquiry has just been announced after about 5 months after the federal government's Regional Banking Task Force handed down its final report. It comes as Sussex Inlet lost its last bank branch on Thursday. As you probably know, there have been widespread closures right across the listening area in recent years, and it's something that's of great concern to many of our listeners. Martin North is a regular commentator on financial matters. He's an analyst based in Thirroul and worked in the banking industry for more than 30 years and joins us now here at ABC Illawarra. G'day, Martin.
Hello there.
Is this inevitable as we move more and more of our business online? Do we need branches?
Well, of course, the banks will tell you that everyone's going online. There's no need for branches anymore. You can do absolutely everything that you can do, if on the phone or whatever. But of course, a lot of people don't have the connectivity, particularly in regional areas. And there are still things that you need sometimes to have face-to-face contact with. And of course, the local communities and businesses are still using cash. So unfortunately, the banks have been spinning a yarn here. It's all about cost saving. It's all about efficiency for them, not thinking about customers and what customers want. I can tell you that from my surveys, we see a lot of people who still need and want to get access to branches. It's not just an age thing. It's not just, pensioners or what have you. Across the spectrum, there are people who still want, need and must get access to branches. Small businesses in particular, any that actually in the retail trade, for example, still taking cash, still need to pay cash in, still need to put money out into the tills. So the whole argument has been completely distorted by the banking industry. It's been frankly distorted also by that earlier inquiry that you mentioned, the task force, because the task force was stacked with bankers. And so, of course, the recommendations were, yeah, that's fine, just close, but make sure you communicate. The truth is, and the Senate inquiry that's now been launched is looking at it the right way, which is say, what is the impact on the local communities when those branches close? Because all the research that we've done shows that when branches are closed, economic activity decreases, people start leaving, and so it's another death knell to local communities. And by the way, these branch closures are not just deeply out in regional areas, but even closer into our major cities too. So there's a real big issue here.
So, though it may be true that more businesses moving online, the banks are not telling the whole story in that it's simply a cost-saving measure for them. They're not really saying that.
Well,
is that right?
They are definitely saying that everybody's moving online, but if you look statistically, even their own statistics don't actually prove that point. So quite a few people are registered for online banking, but a lot of people are still using branches and ATMs and cash. And so that's the first point where they're being flexible with the truth. The second point is that if you actually close a branch in a regional community and your next branch is 40 to 50 kilometres down the road, right, not only is that very inconvenient, not only does it, if you're going to drive there, if you can drive there, going to actually take a lot of fuel. Think of the carbon emissions on that, all of those things. The third point is that they've got this accounting process that they use where they hold all the profits from the products that are sold to customers centrally, but push all the costs down to the branches, so they make the branches look unprofitable. But if you talk to local community banks, and we're lucky we have in Thurrool a couple of local community banks, they're profitable and they've got branches. So it's about how you account for it as well.
How does this accounting work? You're saying if you take out a home loan, for instance, all the profit from that home loan goes to Banking Central, but all of the losses, as in all the wages and the rent you pay, is accrued by the branch. Is that what you're saying?
It's a fudge. It's a really big fudge. It's one that's not just here in Australia, but other banks around the world are doing precisely the same. They want to make the argument that branches are unprofitable, all this cash handling, etc., all these staff costs. And look, banks have significant drains on their costs because of the people that they employ, but actually employing people is probably a good thing. Cash handling is quite expensive. The other big cost, of course, is technology costs, and they're arguing that they need to invest in this sort of revolution that's happening. But actually, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. I'm perfectly comfortable for people to use digital, and when they want to, that's fine. But there's a big need in the local communities to continue to have access to the critical banking services that they need. And by the way, AusPost, who do and can provide some limited banking services at a cost in some cases, can't do the full range of services. We've seen spreadsheets from the banks that show about 1/3 of services would potentially be accessible via AusPost at the moment. So we need a fundamentally different approach to dealing with this issue, because this is important not just for the banking sector, but for communities and businesses too.
Well, I mean, they are a profit-making enterprise, and if their branches are losing money, why wouldn't they close them if they can make hand-over-fist profits and close a few branches?
Well, except, of course, they get massive support from government. Look at for example, the RBA gave them what's called the Term Funding Facility, very cheap money, nearly 200 billion. That's actually money sitting now with the RBA, and the RBA is paying the banks money back. So the point is the banks actually have a lot of support from government. They also have a social license, right? So there's a bit of a trade-off here. All this support from government means the banks have an obligation beyond just being a purely commercial entity, in my view. There's a need to ensure that communities are supported with the right services to be able to enable those communities to thrive. And by the way, also to make sure that they can lend to small businesses in those communities, because that's the other thing that we're finding difficult at the moment. So there's a really important trade-off between, the banks just milking the community to make more profits for their shareholders versus providing the appropriate services in the local communities. We can do both. And look, if the banks don't want to play that game, what we need then is a national bank like Commonwealth Bank used to be, which is essentially a government-backed entity like they have in New Zealand with Kiwibank, which actually provides the basic banking services that we need in the community. And hopefully this Senate inquiry will get evidence and we'll get submissions from across the country to prove that this is a really, really important issue. And by the way, the Senate have written to the banks today already saying, stop your closures now while we run this inquiry.
Haven't we got a quasi-national bank already? It's not government supported, but it's community supported, and that's Bendigo Bank, which seems to be opening where a lot of these big four branches are closing. If there's the demand, wouldn't they fill it?
Well, Bendigo Adelaide Bank is, of course, in talks with another regional bank. I think the problem is that they've actually lost their critical community identity that they had years ago, and I actually think they're becoming more like the other big players rather than actually differentiating. Look, some of the local community banks, those for the members, they're actually doing a great job locally. So maybe they are part of the solution here. Those community banks, as I say, there are some in Thurrool and other places too locally. The trouble is a lot of people don't really know about these community banks, the customer-owned banking, banks that are there. They are very different in terms of character and culture. They have branches on the ground and ATMs and all those things. So there is an opportunity, I think, for them to step up and help here. But the trouble is the rate of branch closure in hundreds of branches means that we're running out of time because, of course, the big banks are saying, everyone's going digital, so we don't need branches anymore. We do need branches. We need branches with people who can actually advise and talk and help with customers, and also provide access to cash, because cash is still a critical element within the community and will be for a long, long time. And we need to preserve that access to cash, by the way, because, of course, when the power goes off, suddenly digital no longer works. And, if you think of the South Coast bushfires, we had a lot of areas that were completely disconnected from digital for weeks, and only those with cash could get by. So we need to keep cash in the system and not let that just die too.
Okay, good on you, Martin. Always good to talk to you.
Great, thanks.
It's Martin North, Principal from Digital Finance Analytics and a former worker within the banking industry. Hello, Nick, says Ron. I run a small business in Wollongong. Last week, Australia Post in Crown Street advised from the 1st of May they would no longer accept cheques for payment. We still use them for buying stamps and envelopes, etc. It's ridiculous given our bank still issues us with a chequebook and cheques are still legal. Gosh, that's an interesting one. A government-run Australia Post, saying they won't take cheques, which are still legal. That's very interesting news. Jason said, my 14-year-old set up an account online but was made to go into a branch to be identified. There's a few online banks that have interesting issues with identification, let me tell you, having set up some accounts for my own kids. You and Nick Ryanberg at 97.3 ABC Illawarra.